Okay. Hello, everybody. Good to have you here today. I am Karen Bryla McNeese, dietitian with the UK Health and Wellness Program, also known as the Lazy Dietitian. Okay. If there's anyone in the chat who's able to just let me know that you can see me and hear me all right, I would really appreciate that. I always get so nervous that something's happened and I'm just talking out into the void. Okay, great. Thank you, Shelly. I appreciate that. Okay. So, thank you for joining me for this monthly edition of The Lazy Dietitian. That's what we've been doing here in 2025, giving you a monthly hit of The Lazy Dietitian. So, today we're going to talk about lazy ways to consume less sugar. This topic had a huge response. The registration for this lazy dietitian was pretty off the charts compared to a lot of the other topics. So I'm really excited to be able to share this with you today, seeing that there's so much interest. And thank you again for being with me. Okay, let's get started. Okay, so first of all, why do we care about added sugar? Okay. And we're going to talk about exactly what added sugar means in a moment, but let's establish why we're even talking about this and probably why so many of you are tuned in today. All right. You've probably heard a lot about added sugar and some of the dangers, health dangers it may pose. Excessive amounts. Okay. We're going to talk about what excessive amounts of added sugar may look like. But we know that this can tend to cause nutritional imbalances because a lot of sugars high in added or a lot of foods high in added sugars tend to be low in nutrient density. They tend to just be overall low quality foods. So if we're eating too many foods with large amounts of added sugar, other more nutrient dense foods are getting pushed off our plate. Too much added sugar can also increase appetite and cravings. Okay. So, again, a lot of foods high in added sugar are also low in nutrients such as fiber and protein. And the sugar also is going to fuel a dramatic spike in your blood sugar, okay, which temporarily feels like good and a rush of energy and you don't feel hungry, but it doesn't stick with you, okay, especially when there's no other nutrients like fiber or protein to slow that down, to slow that spike down and then you get a crash, right? And then you just kind of ride this kind of like added sugar roller coaster all day long in terms of cravings and feeling hungry, right? Because more sugar we know fuels the eating sugar fuels the desire to eat more sugar. You may also experience mood disturbances and fatigue. So for a lot of people having again high amounts of concentrated added sugar intake, you may notice that again, because of those blood sugar spikes, right, going up and down, not only are you having, again, kind of like your cravings and your hunger kind of doing a little bit of a roller coaster ride, but your mood may also be affected in that way, feeling like a little bit high and happy from the sugar intake. And then that crash afterwards, or you might feel a little, irritable. Okay. And you also may experience fatigue because this is what happens when you have the crash from too much sugar. Inflammation, we're hearing more and more about how inflammation affects our risk for a host of chronic diseases, and too much added sugar certainly contributes to that. Insulin resistance, so insulin is what your pancreas makes to help move glucose out of your bloodstream and into the parts of the body that need it for energy. And that mechanism can be negatively impacted with too much added sugar intake, and therefore can also increase risk for things like diabetes as well. Elevated triglycerides. This is a type of fat in your blood. You'll often see it in a lipid profile if you get your cholesterol done. Triglycerides are particularly susceptible to being elevated with high amounts of added sugar, as well as high amounts of refined carbohydrates such as white breads and pastas. And we know that added sugar contributes to non alcoholic fatty liver disease, which we are seeing a pretty big increase of in recent years in terms of incidence and diagnoses. Okay, so let's be sure we're all clear on the terminology here. Natural versus added sugars, okay? And you can see the little graphic here, hopefully. Natural sugars are what it sounds like. They're naturally occurring in some foods, okay? The primary naturally occurring sugars are going to be fructose, that's found in fruit, and lactose, that's found in milk and yogurt, okay? We're not really going to fuss about natural sugars that are in fruit, yogurt, and milk because we know fruit, yogurt, and milk have some nutrient density and have a lot of valuable nutrients for us, okay, in terms of antioxidants, vitamins, minerals, calcium, protein, vitamin D. So we're not really worried about the natural sugars. What we are concerned about is the added sugars, okay? So I want to make that distinction. This is important too because for those folks who are using a food tracking app, often my experience is the food tracking apps lump all sugars together. So if you don't see a distinction being made between natural sugars and added sugars on your food tracking app, you need to kind of look at that yourself and figure that out. Because I have seen a lot of people do that tracking and then say, "Oh my gosh, it flagged me because I had too much sugar." But again, maybe it was mostly coming from fruit or yogurt or milk. And we're, again, not going to be so concerned about that. So just keep that in mind. Added sugars, of course, are those sugars added to foods during processing, preparation, or at the table. Okay. You can see the amount of added sugar in a food product by looking at the nutrition facts panel. And if you were with me on our last Lazy Dietitian, we talked about how to quickly and easily scan food packages and labels. But that highlighted section there shows you where you can find it if you are looking for the specific amount of added sugar in a product. That was a recent change to the food label within the last few years, and I do think it was a fantastic change. So, guidelines versus reality. This is really the the problem when it comes to added sugar. Okay, um, the guidelines for added sugar originated from the American Heart Association, and you may find that interesting. But in light of what we just looked at in terms of how added sugar is linked to health issues such as inflammation and insulin resistance, those are all, and triglycerides, those are all tied to heart health. Okay. So the American Heart Association put these guidelines out, and they advise that men should consume no more than 9 teaspoons of added sugars a day, and women 6 teaspoons of sugar a day. So that's yeah, that equals about 36 grams. I'm sorry, this graphic doesn't say it, but that equals about 36 grams for men and about 24 grams for women. That would be important to know if you're going to be using, for example, the food label or your food tracking app to keep track of that. 36 grams of added sugar for men, 24 grams of added sugar for women. The reality is most Americans are consuming a lot more than that, okay? 30 teaspoons a day, again, compared to the 9 or 6 that are in these guidelines. Now, I'm going to be honest and tell you that I think these guidelines are pretty strict. They are. They're going to be difficult for the average, even health conscious person to do in a lot of ways, okay? But again, when you see that there is such a divide between where we should be and where we are, most of us, there's room for improvement. So I wouldn't focus so much on, technically meeting these guidelines here. But again, the whole point is to just minimize it where you can and cut back as much as you can. Okay. And that's what we'll give you strategies for today. Also, good to be aware of where most sources of added sugar come from in the American diet. This is probably not a huge surprise. Beverages account for nearly 50% or half of all added sugar that we consume. 30% is snacks and sweets. So that's going to be like desserts and granola bars and things like that, fruit snacks, right? Um, and then that gray area is of much less significance. Okay. So, yeah, beverages, snacks, sweets, start there. And that's what we're going to talk about next. Before we get to uh, specific tips, I want to just spend a moment talking about what we call non nutritive sweeteners. Okay. These are Sweeteners that get added to food during processing, or you may add to foods at home that taste sweet but have no um, caloric value. Okay, they have 0 calories. Examples would include things like saccharin, which is the Sweet and Low brand, aspartame, which is equal, sucralose is Splenda, a sulfame potassium, also known as ACE K, and things like stevia or monk fruit, okay, which are, I know, arguably more natural sources, but they are still technically in the category of non nutritive sweeteners, okay? These sweeteners are also not without risk, and in my opinion, should also be minimized to the extent possible, okay? I really view added sugars and non-nutritive sweeteners very much in the same boat for a few reasons. One of the main ones is that non-nutritive sweeteners, because they are so intensely sweet compared to regular sugar, they can alter taste perceptions, right? So it means that you can get very accustomed to the intense sweetness of these non nutritive sweeteners, which can actually fuel cravings for more sweetness. And we know eating high amounts of added sugar can do that too. But these seem particularly apt to do that. So if you're someone who says, geez, I always have like a sweet craving, or I have a sweet tooth, or, I'm always craving something sweet, if you are using non-nutritive sweeteners, think about how that may be contributing. And a lot of people just don't because they're like, oh, well, it doesn't have any calories, it doesn't have any sugar. That's not part of the problem. Actually, it might be. Um, are learning a little bit more about non-nutritive sweeteners in terms of the negative impact they can have on the gut microbiome, which is also linked to a variety of health conditions, a negative impact on insulin response. So again, even though these don't have calories, they are interfering with the insulin response. If you think about what happens when you consume a non-nutritive sweetener. It tastes sweet, but there's no calories connected to it. That is a very unnatural state for your body. When it tastes something sweet, it expects calories, energy to come along with that. And when it doesn't know what to do. And so we're seeing that there might be a negative impact on the insulin response. You actually might start secreting, your pancreas might start secreting insulin because it's anticipating calories, but it's not getting any. We also are seeing a lot of these non-nutritive sweeteners may have an increased risk for, various chronic diseases, including heart disease, maybe certain cancers, stroke, increased blood pressure, even. And very interestingly, not too long ago, the World Health Organization declared that non-nutritive sweeteners were ineffective for weight loss. There is just not the evidence there to say that they help one way or the other with weight loss. So I do just want to put this out there again. This is I just I when I talk about sweetness, I really mean added sugars and I mean non-nutritious sweeteners and trying to minimize it across the board. Okay. And just not have to have your taste buds relying on the need for all of that sweetness. And it comes from both natural sugars and non nutritive sweeteners. Okay. Okay, so like we looked at that little pie chart, right? And we saw that nearly 50% of our consumption of added sugar comes from beverages. That seems like a logical place to start then. Okay, so the top sources of added sugar in beverages are, of course, soft drinks, number one, sodas of any kind, fruit drinks, including fruit juices, sport and energy drinks, and coffee and tea. Okay. Coffee and tea on their own are perfectly fine. It's when we get the, frappuccinos with all the sugar added or the extra sweet iced tea, that's where we run into the trouble. Okay. So, trying to minimize these as best you can. Here's some ideas that may help you do that. There's a lot of folks who just are drinking these other things because they don't like water. Water is just boring and it's plain. They don't like drinking it. So, maybe finding some ways to make your water a little bit more fun. Trying infused water where you would put a bunch of fruit in it perhaps. You could even put flavored, different types of tea bags in your water or your water bottle, and it will absorb the flavor of whatever the tea bag is. That's a really easy hack as well. You could even add a splash of fruit juice to your water. Not a lot, but just a splash to give it flavor. Put some orange juice in there, some cranberry juice or pomegranate juice, to give it that flavor that you need. A lot of people are drinking soft drinks and soda because they like the carbonation. So if that is the case, a lot of people find that they can switch to a flavored sparkling water. Now there are sparkling waters such as LaCroix and Buble, which maybe you or Bubbly, I guess that's how you say it, Buble, that have flavor, but there's no sweetness. There's no added sugars. There's no non-nutritive sweeteners. They just have like a flavor essence that's been added to them. That's for some people, it's not for everybody. If you want something that does have a still a little bit of sweetness to it, these are 2 things I recommend. Spindrift, it has, usually 5 to 10% of it is fruit juice that they've added, okay, to basically a sparkling water, all right? Variety of flavors available. Usually they're about 10 to 25 calories per can, and easy to find at the store. I've also recently discovered, Chow. I believe it's the San Pellegrino brand, and this is very similar to Spindrift, where it's a sparkling water, but they've got a little bit of real fruit juice added, okay? Um, and they taste great, and they get that kinda carbonation craving taken care of. If you're open to it, you could do plain sparkling water or club soda. Um, Trying to do coffee with as little added sweeteners as possible. If you can do coffee with milk, you're getting a little bit of natural sweetness from the lactose in milk. Um, I would definitely try to avoid already flavored creamers. So if you need some kind of creaminess in your coffee, separate the creaminess part from the sugar part. So put some milk or even half and half in your coffee and do the sugar separate. When you buy those, flavored sugary creamers, you can't separate it. So you're probably getting a lot more sugar than you actually need when you're trying to make your coffee a little creamy. Okay, so use the milk cream part separate from whatever sugar or sweetener part you're going to put in there, and just use as little as possible. Um, and finally, trying to do unsweet tea. I'm from the Northeast. This was pretty normal for me growing up. Unsweet tea. I know here in this region, it is not the norm, and a lot of people are used to drinking sweet tea, very sweet tea. But I think there's a big trend now going towards at least like half and half. Even if you can't do a full unsweet tea, doing half sweet, half unsweet, that's a great start. A lot of like restaurants and fast food menus now even offer that as an option. So that's one way to at least start cutting back on your sugar intake with your tea. Okay. The next thing I'd recommend is preparing some of your own foods, of course, within reason. I am still the lazy dietitian, okay? And I am never going to make everything from scratch. You probably aren't either. But there are some things that are fairly easy to do that have a pretty big payoff. And that's where I would spend my energy, okay? And these are some examples, okay? Instead of buying the instant oat packs that have all the sugar added, even some that have now the non nutritive sweeteners added as well, buying a canister of plain instant oats, right? And then flavoring it yourself. I still put a little bit of brown sugar in my oatmeal, but at least now I can control how much sugar goes in there. You can also add things like vanilla extract or cinnamon that still give it, kind of a flavor, but without having to add any kind of sweetness to it. All right. So that's a great example there. The thing people also don't realize about those instant oat packets is that they have a lot of sodium as well. For a lot of products, when they have high amounts of added sugar, they have to balance out the flavor by adding sodium. And so you will see those instant oat packets might have close to like 200 milligrams of sodium. That's quite a bit for something you wouldn't even expect sodium to be in. You also see that in dry cereals that are heavily sweetened, that they're adding sodium to counteract and balance the flavor. Plain yogurt. This is a really easy one as well. Now, don't get me wrong. I'm not opposed to buying a carefully selected flavored yogurt that does not have excessive amounts of added sugar. And that is where using that food label that we looked at, right? And looking at that added sugar line on the facts panel can be really helpful. So if you want to, buy a sweetened yogurt, you can at least have that information at your fingertips, compare brands, and see which one is the lowest. I tend to find that like very Basic flavors are usually the lowest in added sugar. So something like a, Chobani just vanilla flavor or a basic like fruit flavor. Definitely you want to avoid the things like the Chobani flips and stuff where you mix in, candy pieces and all of that. Um, but again, there are some decent sweetened yogurts out there. But again, if you're really trying to cut back and control it yourself, buy a plain yogurt. That is super easy to do. Add your own flavor just like you would the oats. Maybe you put a little honey in it. Maybe you add a little bit of granola. Maybe you add some, again, cinnamon or vanilla extract. Okay. Add some fruit. That's a fantastic way to add sweetness to any of these things. Unsweetened cereals, again, a big chunk of added sugar can come from cereals. There's not a whole lot of completely unsweetened cereals out there on the market. One that comes to mind is Cheerios, and I mean yellow box original Cheerios. Something I think like Wheaties, Total, unfrosted shredded wheat. There's a cereal called Uncle Sam people may be familiar with. So there are a few out there, but there's not a whole lot, I will admit. But again, you can compare labels, find ones, even if they have added sugar, that are lower. And if you do buy a completely unsweetened cereal, adding some fruit is a great way to boost the nutrition and also add some sweetness. Protein powders. So with so many people using protein powders now, I feel the need to include this on the list. Um, I like buying an unflavored protein powder personally because it makes it more versatile. So no matter what I want to put it in, I don't have to worry about, oh, well, is it chocolate flavor, vanilla, or strawberry flavor? Okay. It makes it very versatile. And that to me makes it more cost effective because I have more ways to use it. But also, you're going to see most protein powders now that are flavored have some kind of non nutritive sweetener in them. Again, I'm not saying this needs to be a complete no-no, but just to be aware of that. Do you really need it? Is what you're putting it in still something that you can add your own sweetness and flavor to? It probably is. I put protein powder in my oats or my yogurt or a smoothie. These are all things I can add my own sweetener to if I want to. So you might think about trying to find unflavored ones, like a plain unflavored whey protein powder or a pea protein powder. Make your own baked goods. So a lot of added sugar comes from buying like the already made muffins at, the Kroger bakery or mini muffin bites, things like that. I know making it at home will still involve some sugar, but I guarantee you it's a lot less sugar than what they put in those kind of pre-packaged types of baked goods. And for a lot of baking recipes, you can cut back on the sugar, especially if it's something like a muffin or quick bread or pancakes. You can usually cut the sugar back in a recipe by about a third without it really affecting the taste or texture of it. Salad dressings, there might be some other condiments you find fairly easy to make that can help you as well, but salad dressing's a big one. Salad dressing's expensive too, you guys. It's so expensive for what it is. And they're often using not so healthy oils in a lot of the salad dressings because that's what's cheap. They're not usually using something like an olive oil or avocado oil, high quality oil. So make your own. You need a good oil, a vinegar, maybe a couple spices, maybe a little bit of mustard, maybe a dash of sugar and salt, and you can easily make your own dressing and control all of those things. Okay, kind of already been alluding to this, but you want to be a savvy shopper, all right? Um, if there are multiple options of the same product available, compare brands to see what the different amounts of added sugar are, just like I was talking about with, a cereal or a yogurt, for example. Try to find the one that looks the best in terms of sugar, if that's what your priority is. Keep in mind that there are certain products that will always have some amount of added sugar. So, for a lot of things that have any level of processing, their sugar just may be inherent to that product. So, you got to do the best you can within that. One perfect example is baked beans. If you are trying to buy a can of baked beans, I guarantee you, you cannot find one that doesn't have some added sugar, and they're all going to be fairly high. But again, I think you might be surprised to see the variation brand to brand. And just by reading the label and picking one with less added sugar, you're making a dent, okay, and doing the best you can. So sometimes it's just trying to approach it that way. When you're looking at the front of a package, and we talked about some of the misleading front of package things in our last lazy dietitian, no sugar added is not the same as no added sweeteners. No added sugar means there is no added sugar that is of caloric value. Okay. No added sweeteners means there is no sugar and there are no non-nutritive sweeteners either. Okay. I think this is helpful to know because a lot of things that say no added sugar on the front still have non-nutritive sweeteners added. So if again, you're going to start keeping an eye on that, this would be important to know. I would look for products that say no added sweeteners. That would be ideal. Okay. So, a few more thoughts before we close this out for today. These are kind of like bigger picture things here. I'd recommend consuming added sugar in ways you'll enjoy it most. Okay. I I would personally like to watch my intake of added sugar from things like spaghetti sauce and salad dressing and cereal so that I can kind of save the added sugar for the day for something where I'm really going to taste it and enjoy it, like a piece of chocolate, right? Or a little bit of dessert. That's where I'm going to enjoy it the most. And most people probably would, right? So by minimizing it in these other foods where you're not really going to enjoy it or even notice it perhaps, you buy yourself a little wiggle room to have some added sugar in a way you really will enjoy it. Okay? Which everyone has permission to do. Valuing, kind of similar to this, valuing quality over quantity. This may depend on your personality. Some people are just quantity eaters, and I understand that. But generally, we want to try to value the quality over the quantity. Sure, you could eat a whole pint of Halo Top, right? For not that many calories and carbs, okay? But it might not satisfy you the same way that a small bowl of real ice cream would. And a lot of people find that by having a lot of these like substitute type products that are like low sugar or low fat or whatever, they're still left craving the thing that they were after, which might be real sugar in this instance or real, fat. So you really have to think about that. Like, do these types of foods really satisfy a craving truly or not? Okay. And there is some research to tell us that our brains know the difference between, especially some of these like non nutritive sweeteners and real sugar, and that we don't get quite the same satisfaction because our bodies and brains don't recognize those non nutritive sweeteners as the same thing. Okay. Give yourself permission to enjoy some added sugar. Like I said, there is some room for that. All right. For most of us. Being too restrictive certainly over time can backfire and cause overconsumption of anything, but in this case, sugar. All right. So if you've, committed to some kind of like no sugar, diet or something, right? That might end up feeling too restrictive, all right? And those cravings may become too overwhelming at some point, and then you will kind of end up in a little bit of a binge situation, perhaps, right, where you feel out of control around sugar. And a lot of people bounce around in that cycle of like restriction and then overconsumption and going back and forth. So if we can allow ourselves, small amounts of added sugar, throughout day to day, week to week, we are less likely to be, ever kind of over consuming at any point. And then finally, as you're working to kind of reduce your taste buds dependency on sugar for things to taste good, you got to be patient. But they will adjust. And some of you may have experienced this already with sugar. I see a lot of people experience this with sodium when they're trying to cut back on sodium. And then they go out to eat where food is salty and they're like, wow, this tastes so salty, right? Um, but yeah, I've heard so many stories from clients over the years. I mean, I've had people drink so much soda at some point that fruit doesn't even taste sweet to them, right? And then as they cut back on soda and those types of added sugars, like they can now start to taste the natural sweetness that is in things, okay? Because that is your taste buds adapting. They will. It takes a little time and effort and patience, but hang in there. All right. Well, that was fast and furious as usual. I try to keep these short within half an hour, but oh, there's always so much to say. But I do hope that you found this helpful. I am happy to stick around in the chat. If anybody wants to throw any questions or comments in there, I'm happy to address those. But thank you for being here, and I will hope to see you next time. You're welcome, Amber. Thank you. Oh, thank you, everybody. Appreciate that.